Don't just list your tasks of what you did. Tell the hiring manager what your skills are, what your strengths are. Brand yourself as to what you specialize in. Read the job description in detail. Highlight the requirements, highlight the skills that are needed, highlight the experience that's needed, and talk about how you have those things in your hand. Strategically formatting your resume so that it's easy to read, it's in sections, it's easy to absorb and understand. Having the key words in there does higher your chances. It does increase your chances of getting more noticed and visible. It's just make it readable. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have colors in there. It doesn't have to have sections and columns. And to me, that distracts the reader from getting to the meat. Your cover letter is your opportunity to explain things that you cannot put on your resume.
Hello, friends. Welcome again. And today on our podcast, my guest is special guest I have is Doreen. And the special thing about Doreen is she's a career coach, she's an interview coach, she's a resume writer as well, or resume writing coach as well. So, for this very podcast, we will focus on the third pillar of her empire or the umbrella she has, which is resume writing. I get a lot of inputs or a lot of questions from people who say, "Thank you for all the good content that you post on your channel. However, I applied for this job. I did everything right, but somehow my resume didn't get shortlisted, or somehow I wasn't called for the interview." So, for instance, when I make a video on PNG hiring process, they would clear the online tests, they would clear everything, and still say everything was fine. Why didn't I get a call for an interview? And I go like, maybe your resume was not shortlisted or not selected. And that's when they go like, what do you mean? What is wrong with my resume? So I thought it would be nice if I bring in an expert who can talk about how to write a winning, a strong, a powerful resume. So Doreen, over to you. But before we start talking about the resumes, it would be nice if you can share kind of your what you do, your story, and then I have a set of questions for you, which I will dive into.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rose. I appreciate being on the podcast with you and for giving me the opportunity to tell people about me and what I do. So, I grew up in the financial services industry and I worked for the top four banks in Canada for over 20 years. I met a lot of people. I grew. I started, at one spot, moved up, and met a lot of people with different skills. And I realized that the job market is very, very, very competitive. And all through my career, I was always helping coworkers, family, and friends with building their resumes, helping them out with interview skills, so on and so forth. So, about 2 or 3 years ago, I set up my own career coaching business. And what I do is I create targeted resumes for candidates who are looking for a job. I coach for a winning interview. I do networking coaching. And networking is really overlooked. It's one of the most important strategic things that you can do to get closer to opportunities. So I also coach on a job search strategy, how to look for jobs, where to look for jobs. But it all starts with the resume. And having that resume is what you're going to take into battle with you, if I were to use the word battle, because sometimes it does feel like a battle. The candidate is in competition with so many other candidates who are also very skilled and also very dynamic. So your resume must speak very loudly and very confidently to who you are, what your skills are, what you bring to the table, and why they should bring you in for an interview. And that's what I have been doing over the last little while. And I've seen a lot of success with what I do, and I'm excited to share it with everybody.
That's amazing, and thank you. And you know what? This is you're so right about networking piece because I kind of when I see a weak resume, I kind of try or ask those individuals to rely on networking. But the idea is while they are able to still work with the networking, the you need the sum of everything, like a good interview, a good approach, a good cold email or a message, good resume, good networking, and all. If you work on one piece in isolation, you may get here and there, but it won't be a home run. So for a home run, you need everything in place. So with that, let's move into the resume. And I will kind of flip the question first. Instead of asking
Okay.
how to write the best resume or good resume, I will start by asking you a question: what not to do. And I think that makes it easy because many a times we know what to do, but we don't know what not to do. So maybe if you can start with that.
Okay, so I see this all the time. A person has a resume, and I'll preface it by saying that people are very proud of what they're doing, and rightly so, but they just don't know how to structure it, how to package it so that it pops and it makes the hiring manager who's reading the resume want to keep reading because you've caught them, you know? So what not to do is I see a lot of people with just their name at the top of the resume, their contact information, and then they go right into their work history. And it's very task oriented. They talk about the company that they worked at, and then they in bullet points they say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And they're forcing the reader to read through the whole resume and figure out who they are. What are their strengths? Why is this candidate someone that we should bring in for an interview? So this is important for candidates to know. Don't just list your tasks of what you did. Tell the hiring manager what your skills are, what your strengths are. Brand yourself as to what you specialize in, and talk about your accomplishments, not just tasks but accomplishments and what they resulted in. That's going to want to bring you in for an interview.
So, is there any risk of repetition then? Because if I put something which is also in my experience, the tasks, and then I also put it in my key highlight or the key branding part, which you said comes after the name, is there any repetition? And if there is it okay to have that repetition?
There could be some repetition. I mean, a task is a task, but in the accomplishment section, you're talking about projects that you've worked on. Who was involved in that project, what was your role in that project. Highlight your strengths and your skills. How did you climb the mountain and slay the dragon? Make it really captivating, and use numbers and percentages to drive the visual. When you, for example, you could say, I was a project manager, and leave it at that. Or you could say, I was a project manager on a $15 million project that involved 25 stakeholders across 10 platforms of the organization that I work with. And we were able to implement the project within, 6 months of starting it. So that gives a lot of meat to just being a project manager. It tells them what you did, how you moved the project forward, and what it resulted in. That's going to clinch it for you.
Got it. Very clear. This is helpful. So let me move into my second question, which I have. Now, let's say I have the format that you kind of shared, which is I don't start with my experience first, rather I put something which kind of speaks to my brand or who I am, or maybe a summary. So if someone doesn't want to read the full page and they don't have time, at least there should be 3, 4, 5 lines there written as a summary that they can read to qualify whether they want to read more or not, versus just trying to see your resume and go like, okay, I don't know where to look for the information because there is no summary. It's like having a summary for a business proposal. When I make business proposals in my organization, it always starts with the summary. So people who don't have time, they'll read the summary and decide on that, and then if they get interested, they read more. That piece I get. Now I have that piece, I have the accomplishments piece, I have the numbers there. There are still individuals who come back and say my resume is not getting shortlisted. What other reasons, other than just having a good format which looks good to eye, is easy to read, are reasons why people have their resume not get shortlisted, and how to work around that?
Right. Imagine that there's a job available, and for the one job that's available, there's 600 applicants. How do you stand out from the crowd? What you have to do is mirror the job description. I'm not saying copy and paste it into your resume, but I'm saying read the job description in detail, highlight the requirements, highlight the skills that are needed, highlight the experience that's needed, and talk about how you have those things in your hand and put those things into your resume. Talk about your expertise, what you specialize in. Use that summary section to tell your story. Really, it's a story. Your resume is your story, and you want to captivate the reader to keep reading the story and finish the book. So if the job description or the job requires that you're detail oriented, or that you are an influencer, or you can manage or lead people, talk about how you're doing that or how you've done that in the past. And if, for example, if they're asking for apples, don't give them oranges, give them apples. Like, give them exactly what they want and what they need. And that is going to bring you to the top of the pile, because you're telling them that you have exactly everything that they're looking for. Why wouldn't they call you in for an interview?
Got it. Very clear. I have two questions coming out of this. One
Sure.
is, it's very clear that you pick up the key highlights or key skill requirements that the job description is calling for and you put it in your resume. Now, there are two ways of putting it in your resume, or maybe call it three. One is I just list them down, which is usually I've
Hmm.
seen resumes where there's a section which calls skills. It is titled skills, and then people just throw in those words: problem solver, and
Right.
if it's a hard skill, SAP, and accounting, finance, whatever the skills are. That is one way of doing it. The other way is, as you referred or said, the story piece, which is tell a story around it. And maybe the third piece is a mix of both. Where do you lean more, and what would be your recommendation?
Okay. So, you can't say too much. I mean, you can, but by putting in as much information as you can to paint the picture in the story, that's what you should focus on. So, yes, use the skills section, list your skills. It's easy to pick up, it's easy to read. The eye searches through um, easily picked information that can be absorbed. If you have everything just written, in one page, and it's just too wordy, it gets lost. So section it. And this is what I mean about strategically formatting your resume so that it's easy to read, it's in sections, it's easy to absorb and understand. So yes, have a summary, and that's where you tell your story. Yes, have a skills section so that the skills pop specifically in that section. And yes, have the accomplishment section as well, that speaks to what you have done and what it resulted in. And a lot of times, large organizations will use automatic tracking system. They call it ATS, where a computer is picking out keywords. So make sure you have those keywords from the job description in your resume so that it is picked out.
Thank you. And that was kind of my second question, which is to ask what is ATS, and thanks for explaining that. How much do you think companies rely on it these days? And are there like specific companies that do it, or every small big company does it? Like, is there a kind of profile that a particular company has? And the reason I'm asking this question, let's say if Amazon is hiring for warehouse workers, obviously there might be 500 applications. But if an organization is hiring for a director, senior director role, I assume there would be 30 applications. So 30, do they also go through ATS? Is there a way for you to say these are the kind of companies, these are the kind of roles which go through ATS? Or no, it's generally speaking, it can be anything all over the place.
It can be anything, and this is why it's so challenging to get your resume in front of someone. So go in with the mindset that it could be ATS tracked or it could not be ATS tracked. But your key thing here is to get in front of the hiring manager to bring you in for the interview. And that's where networking comes into play, is reaching out to people who are in that capacity to look at your resume. Send them a note. Oftentimes when there's a job posted, they list the recruiter's name and contact details, or they may list the hiring manager's name so that you can easily reach out to them and give a quick introduction of who you are and why you're contacting them, and that you've applied for the role and you're looking forward to them reviewing your resume and hopefully bringing you in for the interview. So networking does play a part in getting that seen too. But when you look at which organizations are using ATS trackers or not, that's hard to say. That's hard to say. But having the keywords in there does higher your chances. It does increase your chances of getting more noticed and visible.
Agree, and that makes sense. Why risk it, right? So let's cover all bases, whether you know it will be vetted through ATS or it won't be vetted through ATS. The next question I have is around the color or the formatting of it. Now, I know you talked about the section and all, but there are
Right,
some resumes I've seen which are very fancy, like people have their picture on it. And I don't mean to say that fancy, I've seen even fancier things than that. People will have skills on one side, and then there are columns, and then there are brackets, and then
right.
something is down. So, what is your point of view on the format itself? I do have a point of view, but I would love to listen or hear, given
Okay.
you're an expert in
Sure,
this area. What is your point of view?
sure. So my approach is simple. Okay, is just make it readable. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have colors in there. It doesn't have to have sections and columns, and to me that distracts the reader from getting to the meat of of the resume, right? When you have a clear, easy to read resume, it's more likely to be understood. And you want to do your best so that your resume is easy to understand and that's easy to read. You don't want the reader to be confused with color and different fonts and graphs and pictures. Just say, this is who I am, this is what I specialize in, this is my story, these are my skills, this is what I have done. What's more simple than that? They're not going to grade you on the type of resume that you have, so just make it clean. Make sure your font size is the same throughout the resume. Make sure your spacing is there, that it's easy to read in chunks, in sections, and you're off to the races.
So let me tell you, I completely agree to the simplicity piece. I know there are individuals who go with the idea that if I make my resume catchy, and this is what I tell them, exactly what you said, but let me add one more thing. If I have 50 resumes in front of me, I'm the hiring manager and I have to sift through them. Most of the resumes usually come in the same format: your name, then there is section on your the branding, and then there is your skills, and maybe the meat part where you talk about your experiences and education and all. Now suddenly I'm sifting through the resumes. Every resume looks kind of same, and suddenly there's a resume which is different. Now it is difficult for me to read because I got used to a particular format. And I was just looking at the
Mhm.
resume, I was putting it on one side, pass, fail, and suddenly there's a resume which is very hard to read. And since it's hard to read, it's asking me to do more effort. I am more prone to putting it in the list or in the section where I don't want it because I don't want to work hard. I'm just so lazy, versus putting it in the list where I'm like, okay, it took me 1 second, I know what I needed, and this is the clear resume which I want to pass. So that's another thing which I think, when you try to become too fancy, you make it harder for the individual to read, and people
Exactly.
don't want to work hard.
Exactly. Right.
Cool. Any point of view on number of pages you should have for your resume? And let's say someone who, and it may be different for someone coming fresh, someone coming having more experience. I've seen resumes on varying levels. There are even moments when people try to increase the font size to bring it to 2 pages just to make it look like they have a bigger resume than a shorter one. What is your point of view on that?
Okay. So people are always confused as to how many pages should be, their resume. The standard rule of thumb is 2 pages. Nothing more than 2 pages. Anything less than 2 pages makes it look too little, and maybe based on the reader may seem like you don't have enough, right? So 2 pages is the magic mark. Um, Depending on your line of work and the industry, there may be instances where more than 2 pages are required. Like maybe that it requires more certification, more accomplishments, more, depending on senior level or very specific jobs, like maybe the medical profession or so on and so forth, where they need to see more proof. In that case, you may still have a standard resume and maybe have a secondary supportive document to show, other things that you've worked on. Maybe you've written a book, or you've written articles, and you've been on the board of directors or something like that, where you need to substantiate that. So have a supplemental document ready to submit with your application or with your resume. But if we, going back to my earlier point about if there's hundreds of applications sitting in front of the hiring manager, they want to quickly sift through it and pick out the best one. So 2 pages, is easily to digest, easily reviewed and digestible, and they can just kind of scan it and say, okay, here, these are the key highlights, these are the key points. Like, and I said, 1 page may be too little, but it could work depending on, perhaps, you're a university grad with not a lot of experience, and 1 page will suffice to say, this is where I'm at right now in my career, which is understandable. So I think 2 pages is where you should be at.
Thank you, Doreen. This was really helpful, and I kind of agree with you as well. It depends, and that is why, and that is where the power of a resume coach actually kicks in, which is to help you in areas, especially where things are dependent on something. So they kind of help you what it depends on. So thank you for that. Now, one last question, which is a pain for me. That is cover letter.
Mhm.
Why do I need to write a cover letter? Why is it important? And in which instances can I just skip it? And does it even give a comparative edge? Because if it's optional, I never put a cover letter when it's optional.
Mhm.
Am I doing something wrong, or no, it's fine?
You're right about the competitive edge. Someone who has a cover letter may beat out someone who does not have a cover letter. Your cover letter is your opportunity to explain things that you cannot put on your resume. The resume is very structured in terms of, your skills and your accomplishments and your work experience. But what about things that change in between? Maybe you took some time off work, maybe to, look after a child or a parent, or maybe you were ill, or maybe you took a break to pursue education. So those things are not easily explained in the resume. It just shows a gap of time between one job and another job. So in your cover letter, you can explain that, and you can tell them that, why there was that gap in your work history. What were you doing? Were you pursuing more experience, more education, time off to look after a loved one? But again, kind of wrap it all up in terms of what your goals are. What do you want to accomplish? Where do you want to see yourself within this organization? Why is it important for this organization to recognize your skills and capabilities? So your cover letter is your chance to explain those things that you cannot explain in your resume. And a well-crafted cover letter will boost your resume to the top for sure.
So when and if there is an option, you highly recommend that there should be a cover letter added.
Yes, I do. I do believe that, the cover letter is that extra stamp of approval from you to
Got it.
say, why they should consider you and why they should bring you in for the interview. Other things that you cannot put onto the resume about how, you explain more on your skills and experience. That's what it does.
Got it. Now, since you talked about career gap, there's one more question which popped up in my head, and it's kind of a question which is very relevant for me as well. So let me give you a background story and then ask the question. When I came to Canada, I took a job with the company, and it was a very entry level job. I just decided to take it because I didn't want any gap on my resume, and I was like, I'll just take whatever comes because I'm here. I moved to Canada, and I'll make something. I just don't want to sit home. That was an entry level job, and me coming as CFO in Pakistan and taking an entry level job,
Mhm.
apart from it being an ego hit and all, it was a resume hit as well. So as soon as I joined the role, within a month I started looking out again to find something which was more suitable. And in 6 months' time, I found something and I left the job and moved forward. I've stopped reporting it on my resume altogether. Is that a right thing or a wrong thing to do? From and is it important for me to mention it? And people might have bigger gaps, like maybe 6 months. You can say, fine, you can hide it somewhere. But
Mhm.
people might have bigger gaps just because of such reasons. How do they play it out in the resume?
It depends on the circumstance and the situation, but I think in general, don't hide it. Show it, flaunt it, showcase it. It shows strength of character. And this is where your cover letter comes into play, where you can easily explain why you sidestepped or stepped down, based on your trajectory to keep going a certain way. we're all human beings, and life happens. So explain it. Talk about why you took the role, and it shows strength of character in that you worked. You weren't sitting idly by doing nothing. You took the opportunity to gain more work experience, and even though it was taking a step down, or not a very senior role, you learned something from it. You learn new skills, you develop further. So talk about that in the cover letter and say how, even though you took a step down, it helped you grow and develop and further excel at something that you wouldn't normally have tried until you got to where you wanted to go. Everybody thinks that working should be always one step on top of the other and keep going up and up and up to climb the ladder. But sometimes you have to take a step sideways, or you may even have to take a step down to learn something new and interesting. And it all enhances who you are and plays a part in your growth and development. So I don't look at it as something negative. I look at it as something positive that, when you explain it correctly, will make you shine even brighter.
No, thank you for saying that, because I remember I was talking to someone and they said that this shows, rightly, as you rightly said, this can go in your favor because it will show resilience,
Yeah,
perseverance, and that you failed and you got up again and you made your way up again. So rather than hiding it, it's a positive story. So if you put it out there, and then I started doing it, although I still don't have it on my resume, but when I interview, I do talk about it as matter of resilience, that I came and I was ready to start from scratch. I started from scratch, and you know what? I made my way up to where I left after even starting from scratch, and I've received applause, or I've received recognition from the interviewer on that, going like, wow, this is a great story, because not many people can do it. And after
exactly.
that I started to realize there is some power in it which I can play. So
Yes,
yeah, whenever you have those instances, I think you rightly said, use your cover letter to project
to
it in
project.
a positive way.
Yes. And when you're proud of it, then that pride will show, right? But if you're embarrassed by it, then it looks negative. So be proud of it, show it off.
Cool, cool. Thank you, Doreen. On that note, I would like to end this podcast. This was really helpful. And thanks for coming on this podcast. Thanks for your time and sharing this wonderful knowledge with everyone who would be viewing it, with the followers I have on the channel. So thank you. One question I do have before you share any parting words, which is, where can people reach out to you if they want to seek any help, or if they want to get any coaching with regards to resumes, interview, or hiring process altogether?
Mhm. My website, which is coachingbydoreen.ca. Coachingbydoreen.ca. And thank you, Burrows, so much for this opportunity. It was an absolute pleasure. I look forward to helping more people succeed in their career growth. And good luck, everyone. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Cool. Thank you, Doreen. And I will leave the link to that website also in the description of this video. And thanks
Perfect.
for your time.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.